So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, broadcast and recorded live on blogtalkradio.com from the new media and baseball capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. Regular Mr. Media listeners know that I have a special place in my heart for cartoonists and comics people. I admire their creativity and talent, of course, but I also envy their ability to wake up every day and invent a living from whole cloth. And probably no one in this creative class has a greater challenge before him or her than the freelance magazine cartoonist, earning one paycheck at a time by producing single-panel cartoons for a variety of editors. Mike Lynch is one of those guys. Check out Mike Lynch's work on his website, heykidscomics.com. That's one word, heykidscomics.com, while you listen to this interview. Lynch, who lives in the foothills of the White Mountains in rural New Hampshire with his wife and 3 cats, freelances for advertising agencies, calendars, books, and so on. He's also on the board of the National Cartoonist Society. Mike, welcome to Mr. Media.
Oh, hi, Bob. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Have I missed anything?
Let's see.
You didn't start without me, did you?
Born in the Midwest. Yeah. I was just talking to the cats while I was waiting here.
Okay. Sorry about that. Little in-joke between us. You are very patient, and I appreciate that.
Oh, no problem, Bob.
Mike, how do you make a living as a cartoonist? It seems like an impossible task.
That's a funny question, and that's a question that I get asked. I remember I was at a dinner table with some people that I had just met, and well-educated people, and the woman stopped chewing and looked at me and said, "How do you make a living?" Yeah, which I thought was a strange thing, because, I mean, I don't stop and ask a lawyer, how do you make a living? Aren't people on to you yet? I think the first key, my friend Mark Anderson, who is my competitor and my great friend, he put on his blog a week or two ago advice to a beginning cartoonist. And he started with one assumption, and that is that you have a good product. And that's the key. You have something that people genuinely like, genuinely respond to. And other than that, you have to, when you're starting out, you have to have the low overhead. One of my friends is Stan Goldberg, who's been drawing the flagship title Archie since 1968. And he says, ever since he was a little kid, just give him a pencil and paper, and he's happy. Well, now I see people who want a cartoon, and they decide, okay, I'll go out and spend thousands of dollars on fancy equipment, and you have to keep your overhead low, because at first you're going to get rejected, regardless of what you want to do. Even if you set up a website with a webcomic and you think you're going to make money that way, it takes time to build traffic. It takes time for people to find you. And certainly with my route, I thought I was going crazy, because I had quit my job. I decided I'm going to be a cartoonist, and it was 6 months of drawing 10 or 15 cartoons every week and sending these cartoons out and keeping them all in circulation. So I had hundreds of cartoons before half a year later I started to get a sale. And I think a lot of the issue, the way that I figured it, was that these editors, they are looking at material, but they're looking for someone whose name they can trust, and someone that they can see as a regular conduit of good quality material that's responding to what they're looking at. So it really is persistence and a good product.
And how do you cope? I work as a freelance writer. I don't. It may be very similar. It may be very different. I'm not sure. But I know the issue that I had to cope with. I've been married for 20 years. My wife had some anxious moments over the years. How do you deal with that, or is that not an issue for you? Are you so prolific that you don't have that problem?
Yeah. I think
the laughter is giving you away, Mike. I think I know the answer now.
Well, if this wasn't being aired live, I'd certainly have a few things. There's, I think it's really great when you do little doodles and stuff, or you say, well, I want to be a writer, or I want to be an artist, or what have you, and you get that kind of shake of the head or non-support from family members. That's always difficult. I think that for me, just speaking personally, I didn't want to cartoon for a long time. It was a constant in my life. I'd always been one of those kids who cartooned in high school, and I had a strip in college, things like that. Mm-hmm. But I really I stopped for a long time, and I had a real job. I had a real career, first as a college administrator, and then I was working in graphics in New York, doing graphics programs and stuff for investment banks and things like that. But I found I was very unhappy. And I'm fortunate that I do have a very supportive family and a supportive spouse. And it was really my wife who said, you really have to do this because, you're pretty smart. It's great when your wife says that.
I'm thinking, but, I'd like to be adopted.
Well, but her point being, Bob, at the time I was very unhappy. So what's the point of being so smart if you're unhappy? I mean, how smart is that?
Right.
So I say, well, I don't think I can make a shot at this. It's always bad timing. Again, it's like buying a house, having a baby. It's always the wrong time. Mm-hmm. There's always a million reasons, very sensible ones. And you can go talk to people in your family, and they'll tell you why it's not a good idea. But it's a very difficult path to take. And, speaking as, like I joked at the beginning, I was born in Iowa, in one of those states that the planes fly over. And I would read about these cartoonists in New York at the Plaza having their National Cartoonist Society get-togethers and so forth. And I really wondered about that life and how did you make a living making pictures like that. So, if I always felt, well, if I can make it, then really anyone can make it. And certainly if you've seen my blog, I'll put up a cartoon. I'll say, well, here's a cartoon that's in Wall Street Journal this week. This cartoon was rejected 8 times by 8 other markets before it came here. Now, if I had stopped drawing or stopped submitting, I wouldn't make the money, that wouldn't get out there, and so on. But, Bob, you must have the same experience, because the next thing after you begin to have your initial success is people begin to know who you are. And after a certain period of time, there's an organic kind of structure to your career where people sometimes will seek you out of the blue and say, oh, Bob, I heard about your reputation. I think I need your services. And that's a wonderful thing, and that happens regardless of what field you're in.
Or of course, I've heard about your reputation. What makes you think you'll ever work in this town again?
Well, and the stinkers are well known, boy. Yeah. But I have to say there are so few clunkers in terms of cartoonists. Just about everybody I know, the bigger they are, the nicer they are. They've all been there. And I remember I'm very, very fortunate that I lived in New York, and I was running the National Cartoonist Society Long Island chapter, which is the Burnt Toast Gang. And we had just some terrific cartoonists. A lot of the guys who worked in New York City in the 50s and 60s bought a house in Long Island and retired out there later on, and they raised their families there. One of the guys that would come to our meetings regularly was John Romita, a senior. Mm-hmm. And every month we'd get together and break bread and talk shop. And John brought in all this just wonderful work, John was, as people probably know, the art director for Marvel Comics for over 20 years, I think. And he worked on all the titles and was really instrumental in bringing aboard a lot of artists who started with Marvel in the 70s. And he had this beautiful comic strip, just gorgeous. And I said, boy, when was this? What was going on? He said, oh, no, Mike, that was a rejection. from the 1960s. So everybody has had it.
Right.
And that's very leveling.
I I have an example of that, and I guess I probably come back to this too often. I think I did this biography of Will Eisner, and one of the things in the experience of doing that was that he opened up all of his files and just turned me loose and let me look at everything and refer or ask questions about everything. It was interesting how many times he had attempted regular continuity strips, like daily strips, and got rejected just over and over again. And I'll say this now, I think he knew it himself. Some of them were just downright awful. But some of them were pretty good, and you just think, wow, if Will Eisner, the legendary Will Eisner, can get rejected, then, it's going to happen to anybody.
Oh, yeah, and it's happened to everyone. And the incredible thing is that it was really in the 90s when the Internet first started going, and you were able to, very, very slowly through your 56K or 28.8 modem see these little pictures pop in. And I started to see what other people were doing, other cartoonists, most of them amateurs. They had set up websites, which I didn't know how to do at the time. Mm-hmm. And I was really amazed, and I was looking at some of it, and I thought, well, this is really wonderful, but about, I was thinking of Sturgeon's Law, where, 80% of everything is just junk. And I just was so surprised. I said, gee, these people think they're doing good work, and I don't understand it, I don't like it. And it's funny because there's on the web today, there's someone complaining about how horrible the comic strips are in the newspapers. And it is all a matter of opinion, what's good and what's bad. The Sam Gross, the National Lampoon and New Yorker cartoonist, mm-hmm. who's also a terrific guy, very nice guy, and been in the business forever. He's done every single job you can think of. He was cartoon editor at National Lampoon, and he did a talk where David Cypress, another New Yorker cartoonist, was asking him questions on stage, and he said to Sam, this is probably a couple of years ago, so we're 30 years of experience of being a gag cartoonist. He said, Sam, do you know what'll sell? And Sam said, no, never. And, and that was a wonderful, wonderful moment. And also Hirschfeld in The Lion King, which is a wonderful documentary, even if you're not interested in Hirschfeld or his time. When there's some wonderful footage of him drawing, and they asked him, is it easier to draw now than earlier, or how has your drawing changed? And he said, oh, well, some drawings go really good, and then some drawings don't. You never know. And I thought, well, there he is, 90 years old. You still just never know. Right.
Well, Mike, we've got a very active web chat. For folks that might be new, we have a web chat that accompanies Mr. Media. You can click on the web chat button or the live chat as you're looking at the screen. A lot of people in there, a lot of questions. So I want to do two things. I want to give out our phone number if anyone would like to call in and ask Mike Lynch, cartoonist Mike Lynch, a question directly. Give us a call, 646-595-3135. And, of course, I'll always remind you that only works if we're here live. And today it's Friday, September 19th, 2008. If you're listening to live, we'd love to have you call in. And also we're taking questions from the web chat. And these guys are getting backed up, so I want to ask you some of their questions. Bucky J. says, Mike, you live in a lovely area. Do you find it hard not to get distracted from your work?
I guess the answer is yes, but you have to have discipline. I mean, you realize early on that it's seductive. The harder that you work, the greater your rewards could be. Mm. So I have a nice view out of my window, but I try not to look at it.
That's sad.
That's sad. That is
sad.
And I work on the weekends, and
I always tell people when they ask, how do you get motivated in the morning, to get up and work, you work for yourself. How do you do it? And I said, it's very simple. I get up, I come into the living room, and there's my wife, my daughter, and two dogs, and they're all going, ah, and they're pointing to their mouths going, ah, 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 like little baby birds, like, feed me, make some money, feed me. And that keeps me going. Okay, Andertunes, I think we know who this is, asks, Mike, given today's newspaper market, if you were given the chance today to do a syndicated comic strip, would you do it?
Oh yeah, well that's my friend Mark Anderson, who's a terrific gag cartoonist. I guess my short answer would be yes, just because regardless of the huge problems with newspapers going on now, it's still a wonderful conduit into people's lives. And even if the paper's full, there's still all the websites. But one of the things that I talk about, both privately with people like Mark, and then I also talk about a bit on my blog, are this time in history. You have no choice but to live in this time. Mm-hmm. And the fact is, syndication is certainly not as lucrative as it was probably even 5 years ago. But today, you have the option of, building your own business model, and you can certainly, look no further than Mark's website and some other highly successful cartoonists that have established, a base of people who like them, whether they're fans or business people or what have you, and just simply through applying their own knowledge and getting some professional help setting up an e-commerce site. And producing revenue. In some cases, sometimes you give your work away and make your money on ancillary projects. I didn't mean to get away from that, but I want to take the opportunity to say, hey, syndication is not the only business model out there, whereas maybe just 15 or 20 years ago, it was one of the few. But for me, the way to make money is to diversify and is to keep moving like a shark and keep finding more markets.
Certainly syndication is still that gold star that most guys in your business, they think from years of desire that they have to do that. But, yeah, you're right. I mean, website, web comics. I was going to ask you, have you found a way to monetize your work online?
Yeah, there's the cartoon blog that I started, 3 years ago or so. I'm really surprised. I was going to shut it down a year ago when we moved from New York City, simply because I just thought, well, I'm going to have a different chapter in my life, but every day I could think of 3 or 4 things I wanted to put up there, just wanted to talk about or something like that. So the traffic has just increased incredibly. I get the one thing that I don't have yet on that site is I don't ask people for money and I don't have advertising. But right now I know that in the future I'll have to see if I can help monetize the site by providing ways for people to get printed editions of my works and so forth. But to me, it's tremendously telling that I'm the only non-syndicated member of the National Cartoonist Society board. That's an amazing thing to me, and it's an incredible tip of the hat, I think, to the diversification of cartoonists and the way that they're able to make a living. Mm-hmm. So, the NCS, which some people considered, well, those are just a bunch of, the syndicated cartoonists. Well, they're really not. We have so many terrific people. I mean, character designers, animators. We do have a couple of web cartoonists that are involved. It's just a great group, and I can't speak more highly of how friendly a group it really is. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. But
no, you're fine. Actually, one more question about that, and I'll come back to the questions from the web chat.
Okay.
Do you? How was I going to ask you this question now? It just kind of went by me. Oh, so do you use your website if you're not selling anything per se on it, and you don't have advertising on it? Do you use it basically for lead generation, so that people who don't know your work can find your work in the comfort of their own home or their office and go and say, "Oh yeah, I like this guy's work. I should hire him." Is that the point?
Oh yeah. I get a lot of that. I do get a lot of people who find my cartoons, just a lot of cold calls like that. which is really nice. Some of them are big people. I mean, I'm a guy who tends to make money through traditional means like magazines or other publications, but I also do stuff that is unseen, like corporate things and advertising things and things like that aren't necessarily available for people to see. I'm really surprised at the incredible power that the Google Images source, the Google Images site has, because I do get quite a number of queries every week, and some of them are very telling. And I just thought I'd say, if you are a cartoonist and if you do want to do this as a career, please start a blog or something. Because I must get an email every week now. I got one last week, kind of saying, "Dear Mr. Lynch, I hear that you know Virgil Parch. We're trying to find a cartoon of his." Excuse me?
Mike?
Yeah.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we lost you for a second there, but good.
Okay.
Let me get a couple more of these questions in here. They're starting to build up on me.
Okay, good. We'll make the answer short.
People know you and your work, obviously. Mark Anderson has another question for you. It was that excluding other cartoonists, because of course they are so funny. No, I'm just adding that. But he says excluding other cartoonists, are there other significant influences on your humor?
Probably the same influences that everybody else has, TV and stuff like that. Bob Newhart, Gene Shepard, old funny movies, Stan Freberg.
Are you kind of stuck in an era, do you think?
I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, you're right.
Would you rather I didn't put it that way?
No, I like a lot of there are some television shows like Freaks and Geeks and Undeclared, the Judd Apatow shows that were canceled after one season. There's some great character humor in those. But I think it's the stuff that I listened to, when I was a kid. I was very fortunate that my dad shoved in my hands things like the old Bob Newhart comedy records, some old radio shows, but along with his old Simon & Schuster collections of Pogo and Barnaby by Crockett Johnson. So, after that, I mean, you have a time when you're kind of not hardwired, and I suppose I am now after all these years. But yeah, there's still good stuff out there, Bob. I didn't mean to diss anything.
No. I was just teasing.
Okay.
I'll probably get this name wrong because sometimes these things don't translate when you try to say them out loud. But Love for ZZS asked, how do you come up with your comics? I guess what inspires you?
Anger sometimes. When you're everybody's a critic, whether you're watching television or you're waiting in line at the store, and we all have these little frustrations, and out of that you can curve that around and come up with something funny. I remember I was lost at JFK one time, and I was amazingly on a level where there was just no people. I just could not figure it out. It was like a Twilight Zone episode. And I was looking for anything that said information, and time was ticking, and I just was completely lost. And I saw at the very end of one corridor one other person sitting down and reading People magazine. And I just thought, well, I hate People magazine. It's so full of junk. And so I'm thinking, well, this is not information. This is innuendo. And I thought, oh, well, there we go. So I did a cartoon that I sold to Punch with two booths, one with information with a guy behind it, and another one with innuendo right next to it, and that had a crowd of people all around it. So sometimes you'll see something in real life, and you'll get the brain will be going. A lot of it is just being aware of what's going on in the world around you. My grandmother, who lived till her early 90s, was always aware of politics and what was happening, and always had an active mind. And I was fortunate to be, in a family where we read the paper and things like that. And even as a kid, we had conversations about what was going on. So I think, anger and frustration should not be belittled as source, but also just plain wacky incongruities in life.
Do you get ideas from friends and family?
I'm sorry, what?
Right, yeah, I was telling somebody about that recently. I worked at a movie theater in college, and you get these very large people who would come and order the extra large Diet Coke with the extra large popcorn with the butter, whatever. Do you get ideas from friends and family for your gags, and if so, have you ever used one successfully?
I do get ideas from people, friends and family. I've never used them. I just got some ideas today from a friend who's a TV comedy writer, and I had to tell him I don't do that. I like doing. The world, the creative world. There are the writers. If you imagine a circle full of all these writers, and you imagine a circle full of people who are the drawers. And there's so many people in those two circles. And cartoonists, those two circles come together and blend. And I think if you're a cartoonist, you're a writer as well as a drawer. And I think it's a delicate balance. But I enjoy the writing. But it's the toughest part.
Let me give out our phone number one more time. If you've got a question for cartoonist Mike Lynch and you'd like to ask yourself, give us a call, 646-595-3135. Meanwhile, I'll keep asking your questions from the web chat. There's plenty of them. Do you have a favorite market to sell to?
Yeah. Well, like I've said in the panel chats, the one that pays the most. Don't be silly. This is a commercial art.
Right.
I mean, it's really wonderful that there are people out there getting paid. I hope good money to do literary graphic novels, and I've read some really wonderful ones. But for me, you've got to. It's good that you can create good work, but it's even better if you can get paid a decent sum of money. There are markets that you don't see. One of my friends is a fellow named Bob Voitko over in Strongsville, Ohio, and Bob has been a single-panel gag cartoonist for many, many years. Everybody has seen his work. He's been in National Enquirer and all sorts of magazines. Just a very prolific guy. And I remember once we were together at the Giant Eagle in Strongsville, and we were opening up magazines. He was showing me just a few of his cartoons that were out that month, and I said, "How many markets are you in?" And he said, "Well, I'm in I forget, a dozen or 24 markets." And he said, "But Mike, I'm in a lot more that I won't tell you about." And he gave me that kind of Groucho Marx, eyebrow wiggle. And so I think that's why cartoonists are cagey particularly when someone leans over the dinner table and says, how do you make a living? There's a lot of avenues. One of my friends is Nick Downs, who I used to live very close to him in Brooklyn, and Nick's been with the New Yorker now for 20 years, and he sells to a lot of UK magazines. And Nick has cards, and he's been in the business a long time. And occasionally we would get together and we would just have our gripe session, as I'm sure you do too. You get together with somebody and just say, how are things? Oh, not good today, And but we would always stop and remind ourselves, but everybody loves cartoons. I just got an email yesterday with a woman who clipped a cartoon of mine out from a magazine in 2005. And now she's in business for herself. And that cartoon coincides with what she's doing, and she said, I'd like to license the cartoon. So earlier on when I said there's this organic kind of business model where word gets around, and you build a fan base, basically, or a base of people who enjoy your work. And, I already got paid for that cartoon in 2005. The nice thing is I'll get paid a little bit more again. But that's one of the important things. And one thing I did want to just mention is that's why it's so important to retain your rights as a cartoonist and retain your rights to what you create so that you can go on and make money from it if it becomes popular.
The Biscuit Maker wants to know, what do you think of Leo, Mark Tituli's strip, and also what do you think are the best strips going today?
Oh, man. Mark Tituli. Mark Tituli is a madman, and I mean that with all great affection. Mark, first of all, I really admire what Mark has done with Leo. Mark has done something very, very personal with that strip. He feels very strongly about it. He gave a wonderful presentation at the National Cartoonist Society Rubens, and he was showing these various Leo cartoons. And he would always break away, and I think about half of his 1-hour presentation was just him reading complaint letters. People complaining about the strip. Because if you've seen the strip, it can be very edgy. It can be a little macabre. Yeah. But the thing that's interesting is he was showing us some of the things kids had done. They had sent him drawings and so on, and it's really hitting a chord with kids. But I do think there's a number of really wonderful strips out there. I'm certainly a fan and fortunately a friend of Richard Thompson's Cul-de-sac, which just been around for a year. That comes to mind in particular because his new book is out, just came out last week, the collection from Andrews McMeel. But yeah, I see the comic strip page now as television. Bob, I don't know about you, but I have 200, 500 channels. I don't know. I only watch a few occasionally, and most pages of strips now I don't. I'll skip around. But I still read a lot of the stuff that I grew up with, like For Better, For Worse. I like Kevin Fagan's Drabble. I think he's got a wonderful sense of the gag. I love Doonesbury. I think Doonesbury has been in a renaissance the last 2-3 years, and I think what Gary Trudeau's been doing for the troops is kind of above and beyond.
I also like what he did firing Rick Redfern from the Washington Post this past week. That reminded me that he is operating in very current times. Let me, for the Biscuit Maker, anyone else who's a Mark Tituli fan, if you go back to mrmedia.com, you will, on the right-hand rail, where all the interviews are listed, you'll see a number of cartoonist interviews from Mr. Media, but Mark Tituli was actually the first cartoonist that I had on the podcast, and I believe there's a few surprises in there from other cartoonists that called in, so you might want to check that one out. Bucky J asked, Mike, you mentioned resubmitting a tune over 8 times before it's sold. When do you finally call it quits on a gag tune before you stop mailing it out?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, you have to consider what kind of cartoon it is. There's quite a number of markets out there, and I've sent stuff out like 20 times. But what I do is I send out what's called a batch. And on an initial cold call, if it's a magazine that I don't know and they don't know me, I will mail them a batch of cartoons. That means 10 or 15 cartoons, just copies of them with my name and contact info on each page. And I'll send them stuff for 3, 4, 5 months. But as far as and anyway, after about 6 months, if I never hear from them or I don't get a sale or something. Sometimes I'll call them. I'll just do a cold call. But I tend to pursue rather vigorously. I think that I don't know how Bucky feels about his own work, but if you're doing 10 or 15 ideas every week, at the end of the month you have a big pile of stuff, and if you can, monetize that, great, and that's always the incentive. But after a couple months, this penguin cartoon may be making you sick. What was I thinking? And part of it, you have to try and look fresh at these images. But I've certainly had cases, as well as other professional cartoonists, where you resubmit. I will walk in with, for years I walked into the New Yorker every Tuesday to submit, along with so many other great cartoonists. And I would always include, one or two golden oldies after the first couple of years I was there, because there's no way that they're going to remember. Oh, you submitted this 2 1/4 years ago, Mike. Oh, that's cheap. A lot of it is timing. One cartoon editor at a huge magazine. This isn't my story, so I won't tell you who it is. But they had a big meeting, as they are, because people love cartoons. A lot of these magazines have huge meetings. New Yorker are usually only 2 people, but other magazines, Reader's Digest, Harvard Business Review, they have meetings where they're passing around these cartoons and looking at them and parsing them and double-thinking them. And I remember they were almost all set. They had 2 really great cat cartoons. And they said, well, let's go with this one. Let's not go with that one. And the cartoon editor says, well, why don't we buy both? Oh, no, we can't buy 2 cat cartoons. Well, why not? Well, people will get tired of them. Well, and the cartoon editor said, well, you don't have to run them in different issues. Just buy them both. But they said, no, when we have our 1 cat cartoon, that's all that we feel comfortable with buying right now. And I almost felt like saying, please tell me the name of that cartoonist so I can call him or her and tell him, resubmit that cartoon, because you were so close.
Wow. So
a lot of it is timing. We certainly see, you walk into any art school in the country and you see this incredible talent. Talent is so cheap. There are people who can do incredible things. But, it's only people like me and the other professionals out there who are absolutely persistent and dedicated. And I don't know why, Bob. I don't know why. It would be easier to put up drywall. But, yeah. You do have to persist. So, I do try and keep as many cartoons, as we're talking. I have hundreds of cartoons out there, lots of irons in the fire. Heaven knows what will happen with them. But that's the only way to generate the income. But you also have to keep up the production as well and keep your product fresh and keep your quality good.
Mike, I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure we get everyone's questions in. Are you okay with running a little past the scheduled time?
Oh, sure.
Okay. So I want to tell people who are listening that what will happen is when we hit the top of the hour, the live stream will end, but Mike and I will continue the interview, and then it will be archived within about 10 minutes after we finish. So you may have to come back to the archive and download it to hear your question if we don't get to it before the top of the hour. But we will get every question in that we possibly can. You're talking about magazines and markets. This is my question. Do you ever submit to the men's magazines?
Oh, yeah. Well, I submit to Playboy. There's when I was a kid, I read the history of cartooning, and I'm kind of a geek about that, and a lot of people don't understand that there is a history of gag cartooning. When I talk to people who want to do exactly what I do, they say, well, I'm going to submit to the New Yorker, but if I get rejected, that's it. And I say, well, no, there's a whole history, and Playboy is one of the more lucrative and a very friendly market. It's really hard to break in. It took me several years to make a first sale. But if you look at Playboy, if you see the material in there, and keep in mind that they did do a poll a couple of years ago. There was a rumor they were going to get rid of their cartoons, but the cartoons poll very high. Mm-hmm. And I see just terrific cartoonists in there, like Leo Cullum and my friend Don Orehek, whose work I love. But I would say at least a quarter or half the cartoons in every issue are just these really funny, sharp cartoons that I think could have been in any other magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, I was talking with a guy on the web months ago, and he wanted to sell to Playboy, but he couldn't buy a copy locally, or I don't know what the problem was, and he wanted me to kind of describe it, and I said, well, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're putting me in a position that I just shouldn't be in. So you really have to familiarize yourself with the markets.
Mm-hmm. So you don't have a problem that with what's surrounding the cartoons in those magazines.
Well, I don't have a problem with Playboy, but Penthouse has been sold and resold a number of times in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen the most recent issue of Penthouse. There is only one 2-page full-color comic in it by someone that I didn't recognize the name. But as far as I can tell, they're not publishing comics. But Playboy is the only men's magazine market that I've submitted work to.
Okay.
But that's because I liked the cartoons, and I said, oh, okay, I like these guys. I understand what they're trying to do. But yeah, the Hustler stuff, I don't look at Hustler, so I've never considered it.
Got it. Well, let's return to some questions from the web chat before these guys gang up on me. I think this is Mark Anderson. Do you think gag cartoonists are the Dangerfields of the cartooning community, and if so, why? Someone's got an issue there.
I was years ago. I was sitting at a Burnt Toast gang, the National Cartoon Society Long Island chapter. It was my first or second meeting there, and I was sitting there, and I can't remember. All these big guys were around it. Mort Drucker and John Reiner, who does the Lockhorns, and some other people, and I was trying to tell them what I did, and then I would rattle off, I'm in Reader's Digest and so on, and I didn't realize that these people they didn't all tend to read a lot of most cartoonists don't read the Wall Street Journal. Most cartoonists don't read Barron's, and they simply won't see it. But yeah, I think it's funny. I occasionally have run across exactly what Mark's talking about. It's very telling to me that the only reason that my cartoons sell, it's very nice to say, oh, I'm Mike Lynch, and maybe they've heard of me. A reputation might get me a moment, but it's the quality of the work. And there is such affection among people that read gag cartoons for a good gag cartoonist that I try to dismiss people who are just like, oh, you just do that. You don't draw Garfield. You don't do anything important. That kind of attitude is baloney. I have what I'm trying to remember his name. What's called refrigeratorability. And that to me is the ultimate wonderful thing. When you walk around and all of a sudden you see somewhere where you didn't expect it, your cartoon is taped up on someone's refrigerator, on someone's cubicle, and that's happened to me. And that to me speaks volumes that someone took the time to find the scissors. And Bob, if you're like me, that's a 10-minute odyssey sometimes. And they actually clipped out the cartoon, or they actually hit print or whatever. But they took the time to do that.
Right.
But I do know what Mark's talking about, and I think it's a frivolous attitude that I've run across sometimes. Some people feel that there's a pecking order in cartoons, and I see that particularly with fans. There are certain people who say, well, manga is the ultimate and everybody else is horrible, or, the guys who do Marvel or the guys who do Image are the best. They have this whole pecking order, and the people who do newspaper strips, well, who reads those? Well, the point is all of that material sells, and that you can be part of it. Like I said, I was born in Iowa. I didn't know how to cartoon. I didn't know how to get from what I wanted to do to actually achieving something. But persistence is part of it, and certainly your visual image of your entire family pointing at their open mouths gives you incentive as well.
Let me remind everybody listening and also in the web chat that the live streaming of the show is going to end in about 4 minutes, but Mike and I are going to continue recording, and we'll get all the questions in. So if you come back to the archive just a little, not too long after the show ends, the stream, you'll be able to catch up and hear the whole thing. Bucky asks, Mike, you and Mark Anderson are masters at networking, promoting, etc. How beneficial do you think your blog has been in the selling of your work? Now, we sort of covered that, but if you want to just hit that a little bit.
Very. It's really helped. One of the things that that I realized, I should give Mark Anderson credit here because he realized this early on. Everybody uses Google. If you have a blog with Blogger, which is the Google blog, your stuff comes up. I'm getting 4 or 5 emails a month now from people who are looking for other cartoonists that I've talked about on my blog, and they do ask, we're looking for such and such, and you spoke about him. Do you have his or her contact information? And it's just amazing. The only reason that I was the gag cartoonist Ed Arno, who passed away a few months back, and I was quoted in the New York Times obituary, but the only reason that happened was because I was on Blogger, and I knew who Ed Arno was. And I noted his passing along with Michael Maslin, my friend, the New Yorker cartoonist. So there is a synchronicity on the web, and everyone uses the web, and everyone, in particular now anyway, is using Google. So it's been beneficial, and it certainly brought clients who were looking for, dog cartoons or business cartoons or what have you.
Let me see. I lost track here. Do you have a favorite character in Pearls Before Swine?
Who's asking that?
The Biscuit Maker. Actually, the exact question is, the Biscuit Maker asks, what character do you relate to in Pearls Before Swine?
Oh, Rat. Oh, come on.
Oh, really?
Of course.
Of course. All right. All right, Richard Blanco asks, hi, Mike. Do you think that submitting cartoons to magazines or publications that do not have any cartoons on their pages is a waste of time? And if so, how would you approach them?
Richard, thank you for typing in, because I know Richard from some web chat boards. And, I've talked about this before on my blog. When if you're producing at that rate of 10 or 15 finished cartoons a week, you wind up with a big pile of them. And I remember I had the brainstorm years ago, I'll send them to these magazines. My success rate, I thought, was rather high, which is 4 or 5%. Now, that may not sound like a very successful rate, but with a direct mail sales campaign, that's considered a huge breakthrough. Most of the magazines that are out there that you see on the newsstand don't have cartoons, but there are, quite a variety of industry magazines, and not to let any cats out of the bag, but just about any industry has, there's a candy industry magazine, and there's a magazine called Across the Board, it's aimed at people who are on boards of corporations. Mm-hmm. What you'll find after a while is that you have, you have 10 cartoons with people at board meetings. I could send them some cartoons. What I found is that with these magazines, and there's a lot more, and we could talk in depth, but phooey. The incredible thing is that everyone loves cartoons, and a lot of times I have gotten there's a wonderful editor in one magazine, and I won't mention who he is, but he loves my work. He just loves it, and I send him stuff, And it took him 3 or 4 years, but he would say, Mike, we don't have a budget line for this, but I just love. And there's something to kindness and persistence in business. And I did eventually do a good chunk of business with him. But I think that by and large, my answer is 95% of the time it just is not going to work. But I really think that it's worth a shot and it's worth trying. But again, as I said earlier, I don't send emails on a cold call. I always send paper, because when they open it, it's instant. It falls out. It's right there. The image is there. They don't have to double click. They don't have to run a virus check. It doesn't get thrown into their spam filter. And 9 times out of 10, I know that it gets there.
Gregory K. asks a relative question. He says, mailing a ton of batches of cartoons every week is expensive. How much can a gag cartoonist expect to pay per week just for mailing out cartoons? And do you have any great secrets for lowering those costs? Well,
yeah. You can send... there's all sorts of terms in gag cartooning that came out of the 1950s that are still applicable today. Yeah, I was going to say, send half sheets. Half sheets are exactly what they sound like. It's a sheet of paper cut in half. Go to your post office. They'll show you. They have this little device at the post office. You can actually send I don't know what the measurement is, but you can send an envelope that's bigger than a regular size envelope, not as big as a 9x12. And you can actually cut your postage rate by 2/3 or 3/4 by using that. And I don't, that's certainly one way to really cut your costs. And so that's one way. There you go.
Okay. Saturday Chick says, "Hey Mike, what's the worst rejection you've ever had?"
Oh, that's Stephanie Pirro, who she's a syndicated cartoonist with King Features, and she's one of the 6 chicks, and she does a wonderful panel called Fair Game, and has a number of collections out. She's great pal.
And she's also no longer anonymous. Thanks a lot, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, she does comment on blogs, and so yeah. Sorry, but I have to out her because I think she's one of the best cartoonists out there. But gosh, I think my favorite rejection, which is alternately horrifying and funny, when I was asked by a very major New York City magazine. I was asked. They contacted me out of the blue. One of those wonderful, oh, we love your work and so forth. Please send us some stuff because we're going to start publishing cartoons, and you're exactly what we're looking for. Well, I started sending them stuff, and as I described to you, Bob, I send, 15, maybe 20 cartoons every couple of weeks, and I would send a little note, here you go, here you are. And after 3 months, I called him and said, what's going on? And he told me, you really don't know what our magazine is about, and you really don't know what you're doing. I don't know why you sent this. And I just thought, well, it's because you asked me to. And I'm sorry that you feel that way. The door is always open here, but gee whiz, please. So yeah, it was rather horrible. I did have a very prestigious cartoon editor and well-known cartoon editor who did look at my work and say the same thing. You don't know what you're doing. Which was, horrible because it was right there in person and to my face. And then a year later, some young kid was in the office there, and I was waiting to see him. And he looks at the kid and he says, "Well, you obviously don't know what you're doing." And I thought, okay, that's a stock little moment there. Okay.
Let's see. Bucky J.
I'm sorry if I outed you, Stephanie. I'm sorry, but she's a wonderful cartoonist.
You two will have to work that out. Bucky J says, the life of a cartoonist such as yourself and myself can be rather isolated. How do you keep connected with others?
Well, I joined the National Cartoonist Society in 2000 because I anticipated that I would become kind of a crazy person sitting in a room full of paper muttering to himself after a while. But that's very helpful. But really, the telephone and the web. If I had grown up with the ability to, really open up the newspaper and, email Walt Kelly or email Charles Schultz or email Percy Crosby, who unfortunately stopped cartooning before I was born. But the idea that you're able to reach out with so many people, both as a fan and as a peer, is really terrific. So, that's why I'm able to live anywhere in the world, really, and still feel connected. And a lot of people are getting that through the web, but it's just wonderful how cartoonists are doing that universally.
Mm-hmm. Mark Anderson asks, along that line, I think, what cartoonist have you not met that you'd like to?
Well, a major name is Sampe, who's probably best known in the United States for his New Yorker covers. And he's someone I've never met that I would love to. Craig, there's a wonderful cartoonist, Craig Yo, who does about a book a year of collections like Modern Arf and things like that. And Craig, sure. Craig has said, Mike, I like the dead cartoonists, and and then he laughs. So I'd love to travel back in time, as would we all. And again, I think it's those same names: Percy Crosby, Walt Kelly. Percy Crosby's site. He was one of the cartoonists. He was very popular in the 1930s. You can go to Skippy.com, and his daughter, who's a friend, she maintains the site and maintains ownership of that character, Skippy. And it's a wonderful strip, one that influenced Charles Schultz as well. So.
Okay. Mark Anderson asks, when will hats make a comeback in cartoons? And before you answer, Bucky J says, good question, Mark. Yes, Mike, just when will hats make a comeback in cartoons?
Well, not only hats, but the skinny ties and those little aerials on top of televisions. I love drawing those little aerials on top of televisions. You remember, Bob, when we used to get TV for free through the air?
Oh my God! Yeah, I do go back to the last century. I'm afraid I do know exactly what you're talking about, and kind of wiggling because you're trying to get something on UHF that you probably shouldn't be watching in the first place. And yeah, I remember those days. Thanks for making me feel really, really old.
I'm sorry, Bob.
That's okay.
You can edit this later.
Oh, no editing. Everything is live. Everything goes out as it is. Saturday Chick says, Mike, what's your favorite drawing implement?
I'm kind of the antithesis of a lot of people have favorite drawing tools, and I don't. Right now I'm using a Micron Pigma pen. One of the reasons I use it is because a wonderful illustrator named Sandy Cosson, who did lots and lots of paintings and drawings for books in the 60s and 70s. Sandy showed me once, he took out one of these little pens, and he drew a line on a piece of paper, and then he stuck out his tongue and wet his finger and ran the finger through the line. It didn't blur. It did not blur, and it was a fresh line. And I said, that is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm not, right now that's what I'm using, but, a year from now it could be something else. I'm not really beholden to any pen. I used to do pen and ink. I used to do a lot of pencils and pen and ink, and then I found that was a huge time chasm for me. So now I try to work very quickly and efficiently, and I also rarely pencil. It just is much more efficient for me just to bowl ahead and get that nice, clean drawing line.
let's see. I've got a question here from Richard Blanco. Mike, what is the average price paid for a cartoon in today's markets?
It depends on your client, Richard. Most markets, most standard markets, and I guess when I say standard markets, I'm thinking, New Yorker and Harvard Business Review and Wall Street Journal and First for Women and all these. They have a set price. You don't have to. I mean, when they buy one, you don't say, "Okay, how is $100 or how is $500?" They have a set price. Mm-hmm. But I also do. I mean, as I've gotten along, my work is diversified. So I've seen a cartoon go for a lot of money, but I've also seen a cartoon go for not very much money. So my answer is it sounds cagey, but there really is not an answer to that. I mean, other than opening up my taxes and saying, well, what was your average cartoon and how many cartoons did you sell and so forth, which like the lady leaning over the table, I ain't going to tell you. But what you'll find is that there is a standard market rate. I also do tend to cut deals occasionally. I'm doing some work locally for a restaurant, and these are just very lovely people. And I'm doing work for them that I would charge a corporate client for. I'd charge a corporate client much more. But a lot of the nice. It's always nice to work with nice people, so I would cut them a break. But there are things like the Graphic Artists Guild pricing guidelines, which is helpful. But again, the ability to reach out and contact other cartoonists. I'm able to call up Tom Richmond. Someone wants me to do a caricature, and I need to call Tom Richmond. And fortunately, I can call him because I know him and get his take on this. So that's the terrific thing, is that it's easy to reach out there and find out what is the value of my work. What does this mean in this contract that they tell me I have to sign, and those kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm. Well, folks, listen, it's been a wonderful interview here, and you can find out more about Mike Lynch and check out his work, especially if you're hiring or you'd like to commission some work. Check out www.HeyKidsComics. That's Hey, H-E-Y, Kids, K-I-D-S, Comics, C-O-M-I-C-S, all solid, HeyKidsComics.com, or Mike Lynch Cartoons, that's solid, Mike, L-Y-N-C-H, cartoons.blogspot.com. And Mike, what can I say? Thank you so much for a great interview. It's been a lot of fun talking to you today.
Well, thanks for setting this up, Bob. I appreciate, and thanks to everyone for all of your great questions.
They were terrific. Everybody in the web chat, everybody who listened, we really appreciate it. And Mike, I look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Okay, Bob. Thank you very much for your time.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Well, folks, for dozens more celebrity and media newsmaker interviews, surf over to our main website. Lots of cartoonist interviews there. www.mrmedia.com. That's where you can listen to my earlier interviews with the creators, stars, writers, and producers of cartoons, TV shows, comic books, you name it, including The Cleaner, Star Wars, The Clone Wars, SpongeBob SquarePants, Heroes, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Army Wives, 24, The Big Bang Theory, Leo, Pearls Before Swine, Beetle Bailey, Bad Santa, Tell Me You Love Me, quite a mix there, The Dark Knight, Zits, Baby Blues, and many others. Please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, casting a vote for Mr. Media, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites, whether you listen on Blog Talk Radio, DigitalJournal.com, Podcast Pickle, Vox.com, Folio, MediaFly.com, Podfeed.net, Blueberry, Zencast, Odeo, iTunes, or coming soon, Kindle. And if you've got an idea for a guest, email me directly at bob@Andelman, ANDELMAN.com. You can also follow me on Twitter. Type in the name Andelman, ANDELMAN. As always, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate when you take a little piece of your day and share it with us. Come back real soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.